What do you say to a group of Druckerites about Peter Drucker? I mean, I could easily stand here and rattle off 100 Drucker principles and proverbs that you all know. And we all know them because they're also memorable. But I don't want to talk to you, as we just close tonight, in just a word, not about his principle, but about Peter the man. I loved Peter Drucker. I didn't just admire him. I love this man. In my life, I've had a number of different mentors in different areas of my life. And Peter was one of those mentors. One principle I will say is, and he said it many, many times, is that leadership has nothing to do with charisma. Remember he said, the most charismatic leaders of the 20th century were also the worst. Mao, Hitler, and Stalin. And he was right, because leadership is not about charisma. There are all kinds of shapes of leaders, but it is about character. Now, I'm not an authority on leadership, but I am a student of it, and I have trained leaders in 162 countries over the last 30 years. And Peter modeled what he taught. He was a mentor of leaders. If I boiled it all down, there are three great traps of leadership that I don't have time to get into tonight, but the antidotes to those three great traps of leadership are integrity, humility, and generosity. And Peter modeled all three: integrity, humility, and generosity. Peter was a man of rock-ribbed integrity. Now, a lot of people misunderstand integrity because they think integrity simply means honesty. And it does include that, but it's a far, far bigger issue than just honesty. Integrity comes from the word integer, or integer, a unit of one. And it literally means wholeness. It means it's all together. When something is integrated, it's the filling in the pie, not a piece of the pie. That's integrity. When you begin to compartmentalize your life, you lack integrity. When you say, oh, this is my social life, and this is my family life, and this is my business life, and this is my my friend life, and this is my faith life, and you name all your compartments, and you compartmentalize your life, you lack integrity. Integrity means it's all integrated. What you see is what you get. That the way you act with your children is the way you act with your employees, is the way you act with your friends on the golf course and everywhere else. That you don't wear masks, you're not a hypocrite, you're not a phony, but you are the real deal. I find that a lot of leaders, both political leaders and business leaders, as well as academic leaders, religious leaders, and others, living what I call the Titanic myth. The Titanic was supposedly to be an unsinkable ship because it was the first ship that compartmentalized the hull. Up until to that point, when a ship ran into an iceberg, then it would hit the iceberg, water would fill the hull would fill up completely with water, and the ship would sink. So they got the bright idea, well, let's compartmentalize the hull like they now do with submarines and everything else. And theoretically, that's true, that you should be able, if you compartmentalize the hull, you hit a rock or something, and you take on water in a small area, but it doesn't sink the ship. And that's true, theoretically. But it's also true that a hole in the boat is a hole in the boat is a hole in the boat. And I may be sitting at one end of the boat, of a rowboat, and you're at the other end, and you start drilling a hole, or I start drilling a hole in it, and you say, what are you doing? I said, well, it's just my life. I'm not bothering anybody else. Well, it is going to bother other people. And when leaders lack integrity, it affects the entire business. It affects the entire organization. It affects the entire congregation. It affects the entire school. Peter's life was a life of wholeness. He was the most Renaissance man I've ever met. And you could ask him a question, and he would give you 3 illustrations as answers, one of them being a tribe from the Amazons, another being art in Japan, and the other being the Rothschilds. And, and he pulled from everywhere because he did not compartmentalize his life. His intellectual life, his faith life, his relational life, it all just flowed together. He was a man of integrity. He was also a man of deep humility, and I loved him for this. Humility is attractive. What the world is looking for today is an authoritative message in a humble personality. Usually we get the exact opposite. And humility, many people misunderstand. Humility, a lot of people think humility means going around saying, I'm no good, I'm nothing, I'm junk. No, you're not junk. That's false humility. It's actually a form of pride. It's like you're saying, no, the meal wasn't good, and the lady's saying, please tell me how good it was. Please compliment me, okay? It's not humility at all to put yourself down. That's false humility. Humility is not denying your strengths. Humility is being honest about your weaknesses. Humility is being honest about what you know. There's a verse in the Bible, both in the Old Testament and the New, that says God gives grace to the humble. And why is that? Because the humble are teachable. All leaders are learners. And the moment you stop learning, you stop leading. Growing organizations require growing leaders. The moment you stop growing, the organization stops growing. You cannot take an organization further than you have gone yourself. Peter was the incurable learner. I'll never forget my first private meeting with Peter Drucker. I sat down in his office, actually in his home. I was 25 years old, and I had gone there to learn from this great man of wisdom. He began to ask me questions, and I couldn't get a word in edgewise in wanting to ask him. And I thought, wait a minute, I came here to learn from you. And yet he kept asking me these questions. When I walked out of that home that day, tears started coming down my face. And I said, I know the secret of this man's greatness. He is humble enough to know everybody is ignorant on different subjects. You can learn from anybody if you know the right questions. Everybody, the person next to you knows things you don't know, and the person next to them knows things they don't know. You know some things I don't know, and I may know a few things you don't know, and that's why we need each other. Nobody knows it all. Peter was wise enough to know he could learn from anybody, and he was a master at asking questions. And these tears came down my eyes, and I actually kind of prayed a little prayer. I said, God, may I be that teachable when I'm in my 80s. When I was 25 years old, I had a lot of ideas that grew the organizations that I now lead, but nobody wanted to listen to them because I was 25 years old. Now that I have 100,000 names on our church roll and a 120-acre campus and 400,000 churches in our network, a lot of people want to listen. But I'm asking myself, who are the 25-year-old Rick Warrens I need to be listening to? Who have a new idea, who have a new thought. You can learn from anybody if you will be humble. And Peter modeled that by being a lifelong learner. The third thing about Peter was he was generous. He was generous with his time. He was generous with his affirmation. He was generous with his money. But most of all, he was generous with his insight. You didn't see him going around branding all his stuff. and say, well, no, you can't teach that stuff. No, he gave it away. He realized that the more you give away, it's like giving away blood. The more you give it away, the more you get. And so he willingly invested. And he did not write his name on bricks and mortar. He wrote his name on the hearts of leaders around the world. I think the greatest tribute we can give to Peter tonight as we honor him on his 100th birthday is to say, may we do the same thing. Whatever you have been given, you need to pass it on. You need to pass it on. And you need to pass it on with integrity, and you need to pass it on with humility, and you need to pass it on with generosity. Thank you.